Hello and welcome to Tokyo Inklings. My name is CY. You can find me on Qseido at Qseido on Instagram, and you can also find us at QSeidoTokyo.com. Well, you can't find me, but you can find our team.
And my name is Jacob, and I am Fudofan on YouTube and TikTok.
And this is episode 87. We've done it once again, Jacob. We have returned for the podcast a little bit later than usual this time, but we have returned thanks to you and your planning. If it was up to me, I've just been incredibly busy, just, with pen show preparation and also just general life of the past few months. But how have you been?
All good, all good. Yeah, we talked about that before we started recording, but I'm mostly focusing on video, which I really quite enjoy doing. So that's pretty much my thing nowadays, sort of the year of video, like Mike Hurley way of thinking of years in terms of themes. So for me, the theme this year is video.
And you've got 5.75k followers now, so almost at 6k. Almost at 6k, so everybody give Jacob a follow. I'm going to subscribe right now. I've subscribed to you. And so let's get that number up to 6k. But you've really dialed into this YouTube thing. I'm looking at your page, and you've got all these like clickbaity thumbnails. You've got, Pilot's most underrated pen. Pretty cool. Pretty cool stuff. And yeah, more paper drama.
Yeah, I usually have a conversation with a Gemini about the suitable titles and thumbnails and go with those suggestions.
Yeah, but I mean, this is good stuff. And you've got the Zento one. You've got 510k views. So it's not just about pens, it's not just about fountain pens, but it's also about stationery in general. So I think anybody who's interested in that should give it a look, because you've got beautiful production value as well. So really, really good stuff.
Well, thank you. Well, most of my videos are kind of niche. I mean, things like the history of Sailor Theta and some paper stuff. But then I did that. I think the timing was just very good. When that Zento signature pen came out, I think I did one of the very first videos about it. So normally I get a few thousand views at most, but this one went north of 500,000 views. So.
Yeah, that's crazy.
And with that comes a lot of really, really weird comments. Half of them say, I hate your voice. Half of them say, I love your voice. And then, this is just a pen. All the good pens are European pens. No one uses pens anymore. Yeah. I mean, when you get into to sort of broader audience, then the weird stuff comes in. That comes with it.
Yeah. I'm reading some of these comments. One of them says, thanks, YouTube. I didn't even want a pen. Now I'm here searching for one. Every HR
I probably accidentally helped some scalpers sell these for X times the retail price.
This one says, every HR is proud of you for answering the sell me this pen question fantastically.
Yeah, so I should take up a new career as a Pink Sheets salesman.
Yeah. Anyway, so the recent events, let's talk first about maybe something that's happened a few months ago, but still quite interesting. As all of the listeners know, we have our resident financial expert look in through these financial reports of the larger companies. And in particular, Jacob, you sent me a memo on the Sailor Q1 earnings report, which I think really highlights where we're at in the stationery scene, or the stationery industry, or at least the fountain pen industry right now. And The first point is gross profit down due to increased gold price again. And gold has been quite wild, right? Like, and this is going to be relevant for our topic on Sailor's new offering that was just announced a few days ago. But the gold price has, I think it's increased by like 20-30% since the beginning of the year.
Yeah, it's tough if you're dependent on gold prices for your business. I mean, we covered that at length before. And what was particularly odd about this is that Sailor recognized in the report that, I mean, we understand that given that we have lost money for many quarters in a row now, many people have a concern about, our ability to continue as a business. But don't worry, we have a plan. Our plan to remedy this is to double down on all 21K nibs. That was sort of the gist of it. And we were, of course, a bit surprised about that. But I think we can now see, and sort of ties into the next item in our list, what that actually means now. Because they also mention the special nib, the bespoke nib collection as sort of key to their strategy. And I think we have now seen the first step, what I mean by that.
So if you type in into Google gold price, you're going to get this cool chart about gold futures. And if you click on Max, you'll see that they started tracking this in 2012. Obviously, there's gold prices before that, but this tracker starts from 2012, and it's up 93.42% of all time. So the previous high was 1,773. Today, it's 3,358. If you just look at the 5-year trend, it's been up 74.36% over the last 5 years. It's pretty crazy to look at this chart because most of the gold price increases have been post 2019. So for a lot of people who just joined this hobby, I mean, you and I, we were talking a little bit earlier about this, but there's been a lot of newcomers due to COVID, and for those people in the hobby, you've really only been in the era of high gold prices. And even during COVID, it was stable for a while at around 1,800, 1,900. Since then, that's almost doubled, right? It's almost doubled. So pretty wild stuff. And then for them to say they're going to double down on 21 karat gold nibs, we've talked about this at length before, but that's a big investment in the nib part of it. Why do you think they want to do that?
So they specifically mention the special nibs. I didn't understand at the time what they meant, but I think we can see now what they did mean, because, I mean, for the longest, you've only had 2-layer stacked nibs from Sailor. Ever since Nakahara Sr. retired, I guess, we only have 2-layer stacked nibs. So what they have done now, which is very interesting, is that they have the King Eagle is back, right? And I think that might have been part of their plan. I think that's what they probably was hinting at here.
So when they say they're gonna double up on their efforts on that, how do you? And then they come out with this King Eagle. So we should start this next topic off with, they're coming out with a Naginata Fine officially. It's unofficially existed for many years, but officially, they're coming out with Naginata Fine, and then they're reintroducing the King Eagle after 10 years. When they say they want to redefine, or they want to double down with a special emphasis on these specialty nibs, what does that mean to you?
What is it that Sailor does that no other major pen maker does? Well, one is 21K, the other one is like stacked nibs, right? You have pen makers that work with like independent nib makers, and I mean you have such as yourself a sort of upstart pen maker that's doing stacked nibs, but out of the big brands, especially historically, you haven't seen stacked nibs from anyone else, and you haven't had 21K nibs as far as I know from anyone else. So those are probably what Sailor sees as their unique traits. So they are doubling down on the unique traits what makes Sailor Sailor.
Yeah, so my question is, what do you think double down means for them?
Well, I think that exactly means rolling out a 3-layer stacked nib again, because that is, I mean, to me, that is doubling down, right? You're selling something that no other major pen maker offers.
And how many do you think they're making?
I'm curious about that. I'm also curious about how they even like go about making those, because as far as I know, I mean, you know this better than I do, but I think back in the day, I don't know if anyone other than Nagahara Sr. even made that 3-layer stack nib. I mean, we talked to Nagahara Jr., or now he's not Jr. anymore, but Yukio Nagahara, right? And he was even, I think when we talked to him at Bongbox for many years ago, and he said that it's really hard to make these 3-layer stack nibs, and the yield is pretty low. It's like wasting a lot of nibs. So he wasn't confident in doing it, and we specifically asked him, would you consider doing like 3-layer nibs again? And he said, no, I don't want to do that anymore. So the question is, who is making these 3-layer stack nibs? So who's trained them, and who's actually doing that? Have they found any way to manufacture these at scale that doesn't require like a nib maker holding, the nibs together, or however you go about doing it? I don't know.
So I think Nagahara Jr. is the one that's still training them, because it's been an open secret that he's back at Sailor, right? So he's been back at Sailor as a special consultant to them, and they're paying him properly this time, so he's happy about that. I ask you this question because there's been talk in the Chinese community. Basically, yes, they're making these new nibs, but I believe they're only making 30 of them, which is not my definition of doubling down.
I would imagine that this is like a trial run, right? See, is there a market for it, and then they can scale up later. And I'm curious about how popular it's going to be, because I mean, we talked about these stacked nibs before, and my view, you might not agree, my view is you can get a similar writing experience at a much lower cost. So you don't buy it primarily because of the writing experience. You buy it because of the craftsmanship. You might even buy it because who makes the nib. So if you have an old King Eagle, well, you have something created by the legend himself, Nobuyoshi Nagahara, right? And I think that's a big part of the appeal. And also, back in the day, as far as I know, and I could be wrong about this, but I don't think anyone else made widely available 3-layer stacked nibs. So this was the only thing you could get, right? So now you have sort of, at least officially, like unnamed nib maker is making these nibs, and now you have from pen makers big and small, like independent nibmeisters, also making 2-layer, 3-layer stacked nibs. So the question is there going to be a demand for this? I don't know the answer. I'm really curious to see what happens. What do you think?
I think these should still be pretty popular. But I think, how can you really know if something is popular or not if you only make 30 of them? And I found the source. It's Sailor Taiwan. So I'm gonna share this link with you so we can have this on the show notes later. Unfortunately, it's on Facebook. But if you make 30 of something and they sell out, yeah, that was a resounding success, but doesn't mean that you make 300 next time. how do you test how large the market is? But I think people will buy these because, again, it's something new, like you said, or something old, but it's come back. And people like to compare, right? Like, people like to collect even if they're huge Nobuyoshi fans, like, okay, this new one versus the old one. This is how these rights, and we know that the Chinese part of the community is really into these nibs, right? So I think these will be picked up, especially because the pricing on these is surprisingly very, very fair. It's 220,000 yen.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, by 2025 standards, I mean, we talked about that before the show, but by 2025 standards, that is fair, especially if you assume that the yield is not 100%, and especially if you assume that there's a fair amount of labor going into this, which you have to assume. I mean, this is not something anyone can easily do, right? So considering the labor cost, considering the potential low yield, considering the gold cost, that's almost aggressive.
Yeah, so, I mean, we can calculate the gold cost pretty easily, right? If we look at the weight, let's say it's a gram, right? 3 of those nibs, that's 3 grams of gold. 3 grams gold price. Okay, my Google just went down. But if we look at how much it costs in dollar terms, it's less than it's around $1,500, right? And if you look at just getting the pens, that almost looks like that's just the price of 3 pens without even the labor cost.
Which makes me wonder, I kind of suspect that maybe they have found a more automated way to make these that doesn't require someone doing it sort of, I don't know, handheld or however you do stack nibs. Maybe they have found a way to do this with a guaranteed high yield at a scale. That would make sense, I think.
But if you look at the actual picture, right? If you look at the actual picture itself, it still does look like it is handmade. You can see the kind of, what I like to call them scars, but you can see, especially the bottom layer, there's a line through that where it's not completely welded through. So I think these still look handmade, which is interesting because the pen itself, I don't know how they do this. I mean, Sailor, they do this every time, but the picture looks almost CG, but you know it's not because there's weird like lighting issues.
Yeah.
But so it still looks hand done, and I just did a quick search on Google. 3 grams of gold is approximately $323 US. So, add in labor and then add in margin, you're not making that much money on this. So how is this going to help them with their finances if they're only making 30?
Well, if it's 30 for now, again, this will be the trial run. But what I'm wondering about also related to this, if you, after a decade, maybe longer, are introducing a nib that the pen community, including sort of the wealthier part of the pen community, has been waiting for a long time. Why do you introduce it on a regular black pen instead of with some really exotic special edition, limited edition, anniversary edition, whatever it may be?
Well, that's, I think, I'm sorry to go back to this, the number thing, but that's the funny thing, isn't it? Because if you're only going to make 30 of them, as you said, why not make it on something a little bit special? You can just introduce a different color of injection molding, right? And instead of selling for 220,000 yen, you sell at 250,000 yen. Honestly, makes no difference for the consumer. 220, 250, it's just at that price point, it's just an expensive pen. Another 30,000 yen isn't going to be the reason why somebody doesn't purchase the pen. And so, maybe there's a little bit of missed opportunity here, but it kind of goes to show how they're thinking in Sailor HQ at Kure, right? Like they've got this great idea, which is let's go back into the archives, but there isn't more of a, okay, we're gonna do something from the archives, but we're gonna do something with a new twist this time. Which I think is a big reason for why they're in this conundrum in the first place.
How do you mean?
Well, because they saw the success of their store limited editions. They're like, okay, let's do that, right? Let's do a lot of that. If they see something that works, they just say, okay, let's do that. Let's not really think of how to keep this new, how to keep this spicy. Instead, it's almost kind of like they're very one track, and that's what the 21K, doubling down 21K reminds me of. I think keeping their bespoke nib line in 21K is definitely how they should go, but to double down on the rest of that, on the rest of the lineup in this economy, with the gold prices, and with just general how do I call it, economic instability, I'm not seeing where the winning strategy is. But I think because they've leaned in so hard on 21K gold marketing, they feel like, okay, this is what works, this is what customers love about us, so we're going to do more of this. Instead of pivoting to okay, how are we going to differentiate the part of our business which by just market forces will have to be extremely expensive. And let's face it, less people are going to be able to afford gold nibs now. I think that's just a reality of the matter, right? So then how do you carve out, and we've talked about this at length before as well, but how do you carve out let's call it the middle class for pen buyers, right? Like how do you carve out something within the maybe $100 to $300 range? And that's where Sailor has been wildly unsuccessful, right?
They have tried a few things that don't really have anything particularly interesting right now in that range. To be honest, they're not alone in that. I think pilots to some extent have the same problem. Like if you black injection molded pen with a gold nib, that's at sort of 50,000 yen. That's I'm not sure how big the market for that is now, especially given that people's salaries haven't increased and so on. So if anything, you would want something more colorful and replace gold with steel at that range.
Right. So that's what I'm saying. Like if you're gonna double down on 21K, to me it seems like you're talking the very high end of the market.
That's another thing about this King Eagle. If you're doing that, and we talked about that before, but when you're buying a high-end pen, you're buying a story as much as you're buying a product. Right? You want to know who made this, how did they make it, talk about the process, talk about the selection of materials, tell me why this pen. I don't see a story here. I would like to know more about why are you making this pen, this nib again? Who is involved? How do you go about making it? Tell me a story.
And I think, this batch of 30, they'll definitely sell out because there's probably 30 people in the world that just want to, pick it up, play with it, compare with the stuff from the past.
Yeah.
But if they're going to make this an actual, permanent offering, that's where the questions come. And that's where, I agree with you, like just the black injection molding, it's strange because the black and gold trim, that's now the kind of like the cheapest pen you could buy, right? Like in the past, you had no choice; you just had to buy that. But now, you know, you've got lots of people doing interesting things, like Maki-e, like Urushi, and 220,000. That's you could buy a Yukari Royale for that, right? With beautiful lacquer work on it. So I think, I respect that they want to double down on 21K there, but what's the thinking behind this strategy? Is there a differentiation going on? I think well, history will tell us.
Yeah. So I think we spent almost half an hour on this now. We should move on to another topic. So I have two paper topics that I wanted to talk about. So I want to start with Grafilo, if you don't mind.
Yep, go ahead.
So we talked about Grafilo before. In fact, I made a video a few months ago where I talked about, Tomoe River alternatives in terms of like ink friendliness and, your Midoris and Lives and Usaris and Marumas and all those. And my conclusion was that the only two papers that I would consider to be absolute like S tier in terms of ink friendliness are Grafilo and Iroful. That's not like a holistic judgment of the paper. Like I'm not talking about, to what extent they are sensitive to hand oil, how it feels to write on, dry time, etc. But just, how Instagrammable your ink swatches are. From that narrow perspective, I think two papers are S tier, and that is Iroful and Grafilo. And which one you prefer kind of depends on whether you prefer like ink vibrancy. I think Iroful is more vibrant, versus sort of tonality, to what extent you get these like beautiful like shading gradients in different colors. I think that's where Grafilo comes on top. So those are, and we talked before when, doing all the various stages of the Tomoe River draw, we talked about how Grafilo will be an alternative. So we have been a fan of Grafilo for a while, but in the latest issue of Shumi no Bungo, which came out last month, I think, there was, the first thing I saw when I opened up was an article about Grafilo is changing. Right? So it said that because of some raw materials that went into the making of Grafilo is no longer available, they had to change the formula. They have to make a new version of the paper, which is very terrifying, right? Because when papers change, in our experience, it's not always for the better. In fact, it's usually not. Again, we have the various stages of the Tomoe River sort of dramas. We have B7 Tranext went bad a few years ago, Cosmere Light. First it went bad and then it went away altogether. So that's terrifying, right? But the article said that the new paper is going to be a pre-sale event at Shumenbund's stationery show. We can talk more about that stationery show in a bit, but that was last weekend. So I went there, and sort of first in line, and I got the new paper and I did a comparison. And fortunately, I'm not sure if you tried it too, but fortunately, there's actually not much of a change. So the new paper has a little bit more of a tactile feedback, and like, we're not talking, bumpiness, like cotton paper level bumpiness, but there's a little bit more of that tactile feedback. Paper, the ink dries just a tad slower. It's not fast drying by any standard, but it dries a little bit faster, and lines are thinner. So I didn't think old Grafilo had that sort of swelling problem, but compared to new Grafilo, old lines look a bit more fatter on old Grafilo. So those are the only real differences I noticed in terms of sort of Instagrammability, if that's a new word. They are the same, fortunately. So ink looks fantastic. You have, the clean, crisp lines. You got the vibrancy. You got these beautiful gradients, and there's no feathering or bleed through unless you use some weird special inks. So, fortunately, it is. At least my assessment is that the new paper is not much has changed. Did you go to the? Did you go to Schumibund's station show?
I ended up not going because I was just busy.
Mm.
But so you're telling me that the new Graphilo has lines that are less swelly, so they're
Yes.
more accurate than the old one.
Yes. It's a subtle difference, but when you so I did a comparison in my video when I sort of drag a line across new and old Graphilo, and you can see the lines a bit more swollen on old Graphilo.
Okay, that sounds right up my alley. I was listening to the latest episode of The Pen Addict where he actually talks about you sending him, or Brad talks about you sending him the I think it's the Bible size refill for the Graphilo. And as I was listening to it, I was like, oh, Brad, I'm sorry, that paper will not exist for much longer.
Yeah, and I sent that just before the new issue of Schumibund came out. I didn't know at the time that it had changed. So it took a while for the package to arrive. So unfortunately, by the time he got the paper, it was already news about the new version. But the good thing is, again, that in terms of like ink friendliness, they are, as far as I can tell. I mean, I even did that like close-up macro shots, like pixel peeping, and I can't tell any difference, which is what I was hoping for.
Yeah. Well, I'm excited to try this new Graphilo. Which reminds me, I have to send you a special package, but I will we'll take that offline. But anything else interesting in Schumibund Fest?
I think this is like the third year that they're holding this event. And I've been fortunate because I've been writing for Schumibund, right? And because of that, I could get this like VIP ticket, so I don't need to wait in line, which also means that I have this like 2-minute window when I can go and either buy whatever I want, or in my case, I just go and talk to a vendor before the table gets crowded. So last year I went to Hobonichi's table and interrogated them about, the paper. This time I went straight to Kobe House, asked them about, the new Graphilo and bought the paper. But shortly after the doors opened, it got super crowded. It was really hard to buy anything. I would say the event is sort of like a mini Tips. It definitely feels more crowded than Tips, but again, the venue is smaller and it's a bit more, slightly more planner focused. So of course, Schumibund is very closely associated with Ashford, and then you had a few other planner brands there. I think Plotter was there last year, but not this year, as far as I could tell. But there's a lot of Plotter and a lot of planner brands there, and some of them sell these like event exclusive, colors or whatnot. Yeah. So that's part of the reason why so many people are waiting in line early. So it is, I think what getting right with this event is the timing, right? So we have a lot of stationary events in Japan. We talk a lot about that on the podcast, but they mostly concentrate around the spring and sort of autumn, winter, right? So you have the retail events in the spring. You have also other retail events in autumn. You have Tips in autumn. You have the big Bungo Joshes autumn, winter, depending on the year. But there hasn't really been anything in the summer. So I think that's why I think they're getting it right by doing this in late July.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because a lot of the planner stuff that you're talking about is actually System Techo, right?
Yes.
So it's not a planner as in just like, okay, you buy a book and then you go write it. So it's not like a Hobonichi, but it's a method of putting your planner. So I think, as you said, they're really smart because the actual refills, they'll come out later this month, early next month. And so before you get the inserts, you get to kind of get excited preparing for getting the inserts by getting the cover. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, I didn't think about that. Yeah, that makes sense as well.
Yes, so people buy this and they're like, oh, now I'm so excited to get my insert. So I think, yeah, that's pretty interesting. And yeah, I think that's pretty cool.
But yeah, if you go to the event without a VIP ticket, you're gonna have to wait in line a long time. There's a huge line outside that Schulich conference hall in Asakusa. So
yeah,
that's I'm a bit on the fence about whether to go next year.
The first day is only pre-sold tickets. You don't have on the day tickets, right?
I don't actually know. I didn't see that. That could be the case.
Yeah, I think so because I was considering going on the first day and then I was like, oh nah. But I asked somebody who's working for me because he was working at the event as well, and he said, yeah, the first day is only pre-sold tickets. So if you went like the very early morning, then probably just like a bunch of people line up to get into the venue. But I think if you go in a little bit later in the day, it should be much better.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But you're an early bird, so yeah, later in the day might not be your jam.
I might not get that VIP ticket next year because I'm not writing for Shimibun anymore. The one in the last issue was my last one.
That's news to us. What why not?
I'm kind of running out of topics to write about because I'm not writing for international audience, right? I'm writing about sort of Japanese/international stationery for Japanese people, which is more, I have sort of narrower set of topics to write about, and I felt like I was sort of running out of things to write about. And I'm more interested in writing about Japanese stationery for an international audience, and I'm also more interested in doing video than writing. So for me, it made more sense to shift over to sort of video. And also, my column was toward the near end of it's a black and white page toward the end of the magazine, and so you don't get a whole lot of feedback on it either. So it's more rewarding to do video right now.
Okay, that's fair. All right. Next topic is the Canopus. Can you tell me how to pronounce this?
Yeah, I had to look it up. So Canopus is the right way to pronounce it. So I think we have talked a lot about Yamamoto paper, and a lot of listeners are probably familiar with Yamamoto paper. They made the paper tasting kits. They sell the Robiku notes, and they also, I would say, they were the ones who popularized Cosmo Airlight, because they brought paper samples to the SF Pen show a few years ago. They did some asked people to test papers, and Cosmo Airlight came on top. So then Yamamoto paper made this Cosmo Note, which you bought and you had views on, I remember. But that was very popular. So I would say they were sort of the trailblazers when it came to Cosmo Airlight, and then other notebook makers eventually followed suit and ended up making their own Cosmo Airlight notebooks. But then the problem Yamamoto had was that, as we also covered on the podcast, Cosmo Airlight got discontinued. Right, it was 2022, I believe, got discontinued, and since then they haven't really had a good replacement. Right, they've sold notebooks and loose sheets with all kinds of interesting papers like Sheep Cloudbone, Takasago Premium, Solist, some onion paper, etc., skin paper. And they've all been sort of interesting papers in their own right, but they haven't had that, S-tier Instagrammability, right? And so they've been looking for a replacement, and so now they finally have that replacement, and that replacement is called Canopus. And what is different about Canopus, as far as I understand, is that this is not just them, testing whatever Nippon paper or Oji paper makes. It's them actually working closely with some undisclosed paper manufacturer and, making a customized paper just for Yamamoto paper. So you're not going to see, as far as I understand, you're not going to see Canopus paper in any other notebooks, only Yamamoto paper's notebooks. So they have developed through sort of prototyping for a few years a new paper called Canopus. And they made a new notebook called Canopus Note. And they're going to debut this notebook at this year's SF Pen show.
Interesting.
So, yes.
And you like it?
I would say it's not quite as sort of Instagrammable as Cosmo Airlight. I would rate it sort of on par with sort of Midori MD, which is high praise because Midori MD is one of my absolute favorite papers. Ink definitely looks nice. You get shading, you get sheen, you get crisp lines, but it's not quite as vibrant. You don't get quite that tonality that Cosmo Airlight gives you. It's still very good, but what I would say is I prefer sort of the writing experience, how it feels to write on Canopus, because Cosmo Airlight had this really strange feeling where it was smooth in the sense that there was sort of no sort of bumps. You didn't feel like your nib going over like the paper fibers, right? But for some reason, it had this draggy sensation as if your nib almost like sunk into the paper and sort of pulled along.
Yeah, I agree.
And I would say Canopus doesn't have that. Canopus sort of feels more, it sounds weird, but more sort of paper-like. Like Midori MD, you feel a bit more sort of paper texture, but it doesn't sort of sink down into the paper the same way. So I personally much prefer the feeling of writing with Canopus.
All right.
I would expect you're going to see a lot of reviews of Canopus over the next sort of few months or so as, the Western reviewers get hold of it. I'm really curious to hear what people think of it, but I quite like it. I would rate it overall. I think it's fairly close to Midori MD, which is thumbs up from me.
All right. I also have been working closely with a paper manufacturer to develop a custom paper. So okay. I can say that is not easy at all. And a lot of it is really just, okay, let's throw stuff at the wall and see what sticks.
My understanding is that if you're not willing to buy like 100-ton worth of paper, then you're limited in, what manufacturers you can work with and to what extent they will do the prototypes for you, right?
The prototyping process has been relatively easy for us. We're on our third, but I'm taking an existing paper and prototyping that. So,
okay.
So I'm actually working with somebody else to make their paper better. But this paper already exists on the market. It's just not where we would like it to be yet.
What aspects of the paper are you improving?
So this particular paper, I don't want to say too much because it's a surprise. But this particular paper it sometimes bleeds and spreads randomly at random places, and a lot of it has to do with hand oils, but a lot of it has to do with the length of the fibers. So there's two general types of fibers. There's long fibers and short fibers, right? And paper with long fibers usually has more feathering because the fibers are really long and they carry the ink. And depending on the coating or the sizing, it can have bleed through. So, but I think longer fibers means that the paper itself is actually stronger. Now with the shorter fibers, you have, the shorter the fibers are, the less feathering there will be because the fibers are so short they don't carry ink. And then the sizing or coating sizings can help it be less bleed through-y, if that's a word. But so I am working on that, and it's been an interesting process for sure. It's not easy, and you describe what you want, and then they try to make it, but they don't know how to achieve the results that you want. So really, it's a lot of it is throwing stuff at the wall and seeing if it hits, and if it hits, okay, let's do more of that, and then just fine tuning all of the different levers that you can pull.
I'm wondering about those levers because my understanding is that sizing is what you basically mix in to the pulp, while the coating is, as the name suggests, sort of what you put on top. But I don't have any intuitive understanding for how do you use those two knobs and what each knob does to the overall writing experience?
Yes, so I'm working with them in Japanese, so I don't really know how those terms exactly translate. But so there are several levers, but it's limited. Like it's there are things. It's not like they're infinite levers, right? So I talked about there's different fiber lengths. You can get fiber from different trees, I suppose. There's also the chemicals that you wash the fibers in, and then how you treat the fibers before you make it into paper. And there's a coating afterwards, and there's like because if you layer fibers on top of each other, there's going to be gaps, right? So there's what you fill in those gaps with, for example. But yeah.
So one thing I'm wondering when you're working on a paper like this, so assuming you can sort of assuming you know what the knobs do, and you can sort of get the desired results in terms of like sort of shading and sort of glossiness by varying, say, the type of coating and the amount of coating. I would imagine that there's still a compromise here where a paper that is more ink friendly would maybe feel more glossy because you lose some of that sort of tactile sensation, and also dry time gets longer. How do you reason about what you want and how you balance those aspects?
That's the cool part. You don't. I'm being facetious here, but a lot of the great papers are found by accident, right?
Oh, so it's a bit like chromo shading ink. Yeah, ask Ishimura, how do you make chromo shading ink? He says, I don't know, happy accident.
Yeah. It's not so easy. So you just have to, I mean, you can theoretically try to control for different like aspects. Like we know that, for example, shortening the fibers, right, will make it less prone to bleed through. But shortening the fibers may have some unintended consequences on, other parts of the paper. So, it is science, but it's also a lot of art.
And also related to that, I mean, one reason why there's been so much drama around Tomoe River is that there's no real consistency, right? That problem existed before, but it's more pronounced now where, some batches are better than others. You might have more insight into the ability to control that now. How do you think about to what extent you can control consistency over time across seasons and whatever may be factored in here?
You can control consistency as long as you take very meticulous notes.
Yes, just to take an example, we know that Japan is very humid in the summer, right? And unless you are in like a TSMC like facility, I imagine that that humidity goes into the factory as well, right? And do you compensate for that, or how does that affect the end result?
Sure, yeah, but that doesn't only affect paper. Even acrylic that's made in the summer is softer. So, I mean, you can only control the not margin of error, but you can only control like your kyoyohanyi. What's that in English? Acceptable boundaries.
But so does that mean then that it sort of boils down to how often you sort of sample it, and that itself comes, I guess, at the cost, right?
Yeah, so I think the making of the paper itself and the humidity level probably has no real impact because you're making the paper in water. So the humidity level when you make the thing is 100% because it's water. And then after you take it out, I mean, we're talking about handmade papers, but like after you take it out, you basically you have to dry it, and you dry it not by just leaving it out there. There's a it's like a steel plate, and you put the paper on the steel plate, so it's actually heating the paper, and you're basically heating all the moisture away. So that's done in a somewhat temperature controlled room.
Okay.
But more important than that is how you store the paper. And so some factories have little little sprinklers, like little misters, to control the humidity, so that the humidity is somewhat consistent throughout the year. So in the winter, they sprinkle a bit more water to make it less, or to make it more humid, so that the paper can remain in good condition.
Okay. It sounds like there are good ways to make sure it's consistent. But then with your sort of new insight into the whole paper making process, do you have any new theories as to why, B7 Tranx suddenly turned bad, or why Sanzen has had so many problems with Tomoe River? Based on what you know now about paper making, do you have any theories about why that may be?
It may be that they're still trying to change the formula.
Okay.
Yeah, it may be that it's literally just a different paper.
I see.
But I mean, it's similar to what we're doing right now, right? Like this old version of this paper is, could be better. So we're working to make it better. When it's done, I don't think that the name of the paper is going to change. It's just going to be an updated version, right? And the reality of the matter is that most people don't use fountain pens, right? So I know that Tomoe River Sanzen had this issue with bleed through, even with like ballpoint pens. But outside of that, B7 Tranx might be they might be looking for a specific feeling with ballpoint pens that they're testing with.
Yeah, I mean, the Tranx is a bit of a special case because it was just accidentally fountain pen friendly for a while. It was not at all made for that, right? But Sanzen Tomoe River is more interesting because clearly they have some big customers that buy it for planners. And as you said, it wasn't just bad with the fountain pens. It was even like, if I'm writing on Sanzen Tomoe River here with like a Pentel Energel, it just goes straight through it, right? And that's fairly common pen to use with your planners, right?
So I think it might have something to do with the chemicals that they use to wash the paper, and that might not have been consistent throughout the batch. They might have tried to replace the original chemical with something that's more efficient in terms of cost, and it just backfired on them because they didn't test with whatever they should have tested with. Usually the paper company does not test it, so as the seller you have to test it. So when we make papers for this, our paper company doesn't test the paper. In fact, that's the value that we bring to them, is that we'll actually test the paper and put it through its paces and then go back and tell them what's wrong.
Your ability to do that might depend on the scale of the production.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on what do you think the planner makers are going to do this year? Because again, we talked about how Sanzen Tomoe River had problems not just with fountain pens, not just with rollerballs, which are both kind of minor, but even like gelling pens, and to some extent even ballpoint pens, which are of course far more common. But I saw I'm not sure if it's your current or former employer, Designfil, announced that the upcoming Hibino is still going to use Sanzen Tomoe River. How do you think they're reasoning about that? Do you think they consider that this is such a small problem that no one even thinks about it, or do you think it's just very difficult to change paper suppliers? By the way, I'm not asking you to divulge any component secrets. Maybe sort of in general terms, maybe not specifically Designfill.
Okay. I'm not saying that this is how Designfill thinks about it. I'm saying that I think, quite frankly, a lot of people that work at these companies don't know and don't care. A lot of people in these companies, they don't know why they're using Tomoe River. They didn't know that. So, for example, a certain product in one of the companies that we discussed today came out with a 2-page per day notebook using Tomoe River, and the first year they did it was paper from Tomoegawa, and the second year they did it was with Tomoe River, and the GSM was the same, but we all know that the Sanzen paper is a little bit thicker.
Right.
But we know that somehow as consumers, but this was total news to this certain company making this certain product. And when you make a 2-page a day product, you're looking at 700 pages. But the people that make the paper are not the same people that make we call it hyoshi, but the outside cover, right?
Right.
So what happened is that the outside cover became too small for the paper.
Sure.
Because each paper is just a little bit thicker. And so what you had was horrible creasing during the shipping of the products. So when they reached the shelves, you had creasing in the paper. But if you are a person, a company that actually cares and knows about this, you would know that because the paper is a little bit thicker, right? You have to increase your tolerances on the outer cover. But nobody did that. And it's actually shocking to see how little of the things that we think are important, right? Like the real nitty-gritty stuff. Most employees, they don't know. And most employees don't really care either.
But even if that's true year one, if at the end of year one you get more than a certain amount of like negative feedback from your customers, wouldn't you at least try to look into what is causing this feedback and then try to do something about it year two?
You would, assuming that you got the bad batch. But we know that this latest batch of Sanzen that affected Hobonichi wasn't even affecting all of the paper at Hobonichi.
Yeah, it was very inconsistent. But I have bad paper in the 5-year. Had bad paper in some sheets in the weeks. I also had bad paper in like loose sheets I bought from Itoya. I also had bad paper in like a notepad from Yamamoto paper. So it seemed to be at least. I mean, either I've been unlucky many times over, or it's been fairly widespread. And then I've seen others reporting problems with like Sterling ink planners. I've seen online someone mentioning, other planner products as well. So it seems to go far beyond just Hobonichi. So I would assume that other planner makers have gotten at least some amount of feedback.
And yet this company still makes their awful fountain pen, whose cap almost without fail cracks. So at a company like Kyusedo, right now, today, we're riding on a bicycle, right? It's fairly easy to make turns. But you get to a bigger size company, you're operating a tank, and it's not so easy to pivot, right? Because let's take the example of Designfill, who may or may not be the company I was talking about, but let's take them as an example, right? And they're making this Hibino product. Where else do you get a paper that's that thin that you can have a 800 page notebook.
The reason why I mentioned Designfield as an example is that they happen to have, I'm not sure if it's as thin, and maybe that's the gist of it, but Designfield famously has this DP paper, which many people call plotter paper, right? Which might not be exactly as thin, but it is sort of in the same genre, right?
I think DP paper is actually pretty thick, especially compared to Tomoe River on the lighter sizes. DP paper is probably around 60-70 GSM.
Really? Is it that thick? I thought it was thinner. Okay. Well, in that case, that would explain it. Yeah. This has always been a bit of a mystery to me. Like pilots, like Mark Planners has like what they call like originals to their own paper. Like Nolte has their own like original paper. Strategy has their own so-called original paper. There are a whole bunch of these planner brands. They all claim to have their own original paper, which I assume that they are just going to Nippon Paper or Oji Paper, and they are asking for something with some like it's basically the same beige product with some tweaks, which. If companies both big and small can do that, why would a company like Designfield not be able to do that?
Okay, so I'm going to DP paper. It's 60 GSM according to Plotter USA. Why can't a company go to OG Paper and say, hey, I want to make a paper that's, way lighter? You can, but I think that's where you talked about earlier, right? Like, then you're talking about lot sizes for pricing. So, I mean, Hobonichi is a listed company, so they've got finances, and so they can buy years and years worth of, multiple years worth of paper, which is exactly what they did for Tomoe River. I think that actually might be, now thinking back on it, might be a reason why Tomoe River had to go, because if you only make an order every 3 years, but your order is massive, then how's the company going to keep making that paper in the off years, right? And if you're not making paper on the off years, then how do you justify keeping the machine running?
Assuming you have more than one client, then hopefully it's staggered.
Yeah. You would hope so, right? You would hope so. But, it's all about lot sizes. It's all about what you want to do, and working with paper mills. If you're working with the bigger ones, right? They might decide because they might have, let's say they have 200 employees, right? And they might just say, well, with our 200 employees, we'd rather do business with somebody else because that brings us more money.
Yeah, and we know, there's like articles in Nikkei every few days about how the paper industry is in free fall, especially, the paper for printing, sort of creative type papers, because like the demand is just, it's not there anymore. The only type of paper in Japan, can't remember if we talked about that before on the podcast, but the only business that is expanding is sanitary paper, which is, euphemism for toilet paper, and apparently that is because of tourism.
There is another paper that is expanding, but it's not because of lack of demand that they can't make more. It's what do you call it? High-end washi paper, because what you have is so like manga and anime are at all-time high in popularity, right? But those papers are ultra luxury and bespoke, and they are they're all made by hand. But you don't have people who want to make those papers by hand anymore, because I went to see this particular mill who's making they said they're making the paper for the mangaka of One Piece, which, as you know, I believe you have a child of the age that's very into One Piece probably right now. I don't know if your specific child is into One Piece, but people of his age are, and it's they make the paper for One Piece. If you want to buy paper from them, you're waiting years on the wait list. and they do it all by hand. And in the winter, right, they can't use gloves because they need to have very precise feeling of how heavy the paper is. They do everything by touch, and so so your hands are really, really cold in the winter, right? And when you wash the fibers, you don't use gloves. I think some people use gloves, but it's still really cold, and you're sitting in front of the bucket of chemicals, and young people just don't want to do that, and so they have a labor issue. And I actually asked them, I said, well, how are you going to solve this labor issue? They're like, oh, well, we're having a problem finding people to work these jobs, and if nobody wants to work those jobs, I guess we just have to, we might not be able to continue to do business. So
yeah, I think that's, I mean, it may be expanding, but it's probably a smaller segment than, the paper for magazines and catalogs. So it's probably not enough to sustain like the big conglomerates.
I mean, I think you've got two ends of the spectrum. The one end is the mass production paper that's going to be really popular, and then the second is this highly bespoke custom paper, which is going to be is still in demand, but for very niche purposes, kind of like fountain pens.
Yeah. So the question then is, how do you make it small scale in a way that still makes financial sense? I guess that's a combination of pricing and how you deal with costs.
Yeah. Anyway, with that, that's been our episode today. Thank you very much, Jacob, for joining me in this bright early. Well, now not so early anymore because we spent so much time talking about other stupid things in the beginning before we started recording. But it's been great as usual. This has been episode 87. And
7, I think.
Yes.
Yeah.
And with that, my name is CY, and you can find me on Instagram at QSato, on the internet at QSatoTokyo.com. We will be in attendance at the DC and San Francisco pen shows. So if you are going to attend either of those, please be sure to check us out and come look for us and say hi. And
we being QSato here, just to clarify.
Yes. I may or may not personally show up, but the brand will be there. But yeah, and signups for Nibwork is now available online if they're not already filled. So a little bit of shameless promotion there. Jacob?
My name is Jacob. I'm Foodafan on YouTube and TikTok.
And go subscribe to Foodafan on YouTube. I hope the next time we talk, you'll be at like 7,000.
We'll see.
All right. I'll talk to you later, Jacob. Thanks a lot. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.